Readers form an understanding of characters in multiple ways. Some of what they know about characters will come directly from the way the narrator describes the character. Explicit knowledge. Here's Norman MacLean again. My father was very certain about certain matters pertaining to the universe. To him, all good things, trout as well as salvation, come by grace, and grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. This is Norman's narrator telling the reader something specific about his father's character directly. It's not quite as straightforward as he was 6'2", heavy-set, and had tightly cropped graying hair that had once been as black as coal, but it does give you direct information about his father's sense of certainty about the world. When writers and readers think about characters, it's common for them to start here, with explicit information, as so many authors do when writing a story. It's far more common to see an explicit description of a character like this at the start of the story than at the end of it. But it's important to remember that though this may be an important part of the body of knowledge a reader compiles about a character, it's the smallest part. By the end of A River Runs Through It, the reader has come to understand Norman's father through the prism of the certainty Norman describes here, yes. But so much more of what the reader knows about his father comes through other sources. His father's actions, what his father says, and how Norman reacts to each. This aspect of characters is often underappreciated and technically has just as much to do with plot as it does with character. Look at this tangle of thorns, as Humbert would say. Let's probe a little deeper. Here's Norman's father talking about Norman's brother Paul, who works as a newspaper reporter. Haven't you heard, he asked me, that he has changed the spelling of our name from MacLean to MacLean. Now he spells it with a capital L. Oh, sure, I said. I knew all about that. He told me he got tired of nobody spelling his name right. My father shook his head at my explanation, its truth being irrelevant. He murmured, both to himself and to me, "It's a terrible thing to spell our name with a capital L. Now somebody will think we're Scottish Lowlanders and not Islanders." This conversation, as much as any description of Norman's father, is instructive of who Norman's father is. It speaks of a generational gap between the immigrant father who clings to his heritage as a vital part of his identity, and the American son whose identity is Montana boy, outdoorsman, fly fisherman. Paul doesn't give a damn about a capital L. But the dialogue here tells the reader their father is somewhat bothered by the change. And he's bothered by the cavalier way Paul discards the formalities he considers important. And it tells us so much more. It would take me perhaps 1,000 words at least to untangle the implications of this single exchange. This is characterization as much as any explicit description could be. It helps the reader to form their understanding of who that character is. So much of what fiction is exists in these unwritten implications. It's one of the things that makes narrative so resistant to objective analysis. Okay, so let's get as reductive and specific as we can be with this so we can be certain of what we're talking about here. Check out this brief passage I've cribbed from Maggie Shipstead's short story, The Cowboy Tango. Here, the protagonist, Sammy, is considering an ad in the Bozeman paper posted by a horse rancher who is looking to hire a wrangler. This is explicit characterization. She was 16 and so skinny that the whole of her beanpole body fit neatly inside the circle of shade cast by her hat. Implicit characterization looks like this brief passage cribbed from a couple paragraphs later in the same story, after the rancher asks her to ride a particularly difficult horse of his. Sammy jerked the reins up, but not meanly, and kicked the mare through the gate into the home paddock. In 5 minutes she had her going around like a show pony. If we were to sum up both of these passages in a single statement, it might be something like, super skinny girl, great at riding horses. But there's more there too. She's unafraid and she cares about animals. She's only as tough as she needs to be get the job done. She's competent, bold. The underlying knowledge that is a product of the reader interpreting Sammy's actions here presents the reader with an excellent knowledge base for this character. This is also why the axiom show don't tell often represents a powerful truth for writers, even if it isn't always a perfect metaphor. A character in action, demonstrating who they are, is usually going to be more complete and more interesting than a narrator describing the same aspects of that character's personality. Implicit knowledge about the character is the sum of all the assumptions the reader will make about the character based on their thoughts, actions, etc. A complete study of this aspect of characterization is likely vaster and more complex than the study of plot itself. This is perhaps a subject all its own for another narrative theorist with a different purpose than ours. I suppose I could sum it up for the time being by saying, it's critical to have a handle on what your character's thoughts and actions mean. We'll get deeper into the implicit shortly, but for now we'll continue with the easy part, the explicit. Explicit character descriptions are far easier to assess reductively. They're often presented as non-narrative elements on their own. Let's take a look at a couple ways to get this done. Here is the great Gabriel Garcia Marquez describing the handsomest drowned man in the world. Not only was he the tallest, strongest, most virile, and best equipped man they had ever seen, but as they watched him, he didn't even fit in their imaginations. They couldn't find a big enough bed in the village to lay him on, nor a table solid enough to hold vigil. The festival pants of the tallest men didn't fit him, nor did the Sunday shirts of the fattest, nor the shoes of the best planted. This is simple, straight description. The reader learns from this description that the drowned man is a paragon of masculinity. He's big, strong, virile, and almost impossibly so. These are things that can be observed, and in some cases measured and compared. This is one type of straight description, the concrete. Here's another type of description from the same story. They thought that he would have had such authority that he could have taken the fish from the sea by only calling them by name, and he would have put such effort in his work that he would have brought forth springs from between the driest rocks and would have been able to sow flowers on the cliffs. These descriptive elements are similarly hyperbolic, but immeasurable. The villagers are reacting to their impressions of the man. This is abstract description. You can't count it, touch it, or prove one way or the other that these things are so, but they're still descriptive elements that color the reader's impression of the character. Straight description can be abstract or concrete, often in the same story. It's important to note that description of a character doesn't always need to be done in non-narrative ways, that is, with sentences that describe the character's state of being. Here's an example of what I mean from two stories with similar titles that approach description in different ways. She was a bone-thin woman with a pretty face, dark eyes, and brown hair that hung down her back. She liked necklaces made of turquoise and long pendant earrings. This is the narrator in Raymond Carver's short story What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. Note how this narrator uses linking verbs to describe the female character's state of being. She was, she liked. This was a famous short story as short stories go. So famous, in fact, that it inspired the story from which I'm drawing the ensuing excerpt. In this passage, a middle-aged husband is describing a visit from his wife's friends, 2 Orthodox Jews from Israel. "You want some water?" I offer. "Coke in the can?" "You which of us?" Mark says. "You both," I say. "Or I've got whiskey. Whiskey's kosher too, right?" "If it's not, I'll kosher it up real fast," he says, pretending to be easygoing. And right then he takes off that big black hat and plops down on the couch in the den. This is from Nathan Englander's short story What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank, published about 25 years after the Carver story that inspired it. Note that unlike Carver's narrator, Englander's narrator doesn't set aside a specific sentence to describe this character's hat, the way Carver did with the woman's jewelry. In fact, the narrator doesn't mention that the man is wearing a hat at all until this moment, and he puts it into motion. He takes off that big black hat and plops down on the couch in the den. Englander uses an action verb to take a descriptive element, the hat, and make it part of the living character. Englander does this a lot, and he's very good at it. This is description in motion, an excellent and vivid way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay, so we can describe in the abstract and in the concrete, and we can describe a state of being by either pausing the story with linking verbs or setting descriptive elements in motion, as Englander did above. This, as I mentioned earlier, is the easy part of building a character, the explicit elements, description. What can we say about the tough stuff, all those intangible, implicit things, characterization? I'm going to mention 3 examples emblematic of common ways characters are characterized by plot elements in the story world. This is barely to scratch the surface, and is by no means even a sufficient start to the conversation. It's merely here to point out 3 common different ways characters are characterized in fiction. Way the first. A character's behavior shapes the way a reader or audience understands the character. One of my favorite examples of this is from an iconic scene at the start of David Lean's timeless classic Lawrence of Arabia. The following is my description of the scene as it appears in the film. It goes something like this. Lawrence and 2 enlisted men are in a dank, nondescript room. After reading about significant developments in the war from his newspaper, Lawrence offers to light the sergeant's cigarette. Once lit, Lawrence puts out the burning match by slowly closing his thumb and forefinger over the flame, while the sergeant and corporal look on intently. "You'll do that once too often," the sergeant says. "It's only flesh and bone." "Michael George Hartley," Lawrence says, smiling. "You're a philosopher." "And you're balmy," the corporal says. As Lawrence picks up his hat to exit the room, the corporal lights a match and proceeds to put it out in the same manner as Lawrence. "Ooh, it damn well hurts," he says. "Certainly it hurts," Lawrence says as he walks towards the door. "Well, what's the trick then?" the corporal asks. Lawrence turns to face the corporal and says with a grin, "The trick, William Potter, is not minding that it hurts." Lawrence's behavior in this exchange says a lot about him, and it says a lot of important things that characterize him in ways that will be significant throughout the film. It shows a viewer, implicitly, that Lawrence is an uncommon man in more ways than one. Viewing the scene without the time to analyze it properly only leaves the reader with the sense that Lawrence seems like an odd duck. But if we go back and look carefully at the scene, a few important points jump out as significant. Lawrence addresses the enlisted men using their full names, which is strange. It has a way of distancing Lawrence from them. And the trick with the match shows that he doesn't mind discomfort. In fact, he seems to enjoy that he can separate himself even further from these men by demonstrating his indifference to the pain. Lawrence has a bit of a messianic complex, something that will shape his journey. The scene, apart from being superbly written, acted, and shot, is subtly prophetic. They'd call this foreshadowing in English class. The ordinary men in the room react as ordinary men do, by being rightly averse to pain and stating certainly, "You'll do that once too often." Lawrence walks out wearing a smug smile. A staggeringly brilliant scene that characterizes the character through his own behavior. The next way stories implicitly characterize characters is through interactions with their environment. In other words, context characterizes characters. In the primer to this section, I mentioned that Ned Stark is an entirely different character when he's taken out of his own castle, where he's comfortable, and placed into an entirely different environment where he doesn't have command of the situation. This is true of most characters. Again, Lawrence is a good example, too. He turns himself into a folk hero among the Arabs by planning and commanding the sacking of Aqaba, proposing to Sheriff Ali that they cross the Nefud Desert on camels and surprise the Turks on the other side, because the Turks would never expect an assault from the land. Ali thinks this is mad, because in his words the Nefud is the worst place God created. Along the way, one of the men calls it the sun's anvil. The Arabs doubt Lawrence because they believe it to be almost suicidal and blasphemous to attempt such a feat. Yet when they succeed, largely because of the determination Lawrence inspires in everyone, at least as the story has it, Lawrence becomes a living legend among them. This would never have happened to Lawrence in the English countryside. One gets the impression that Lawrence was the type of man who surely would have found some other way to test his mettle against the relentlessness of nature, whether it be the sea, the mountains, or the cold. But in the absence of such context to test a character, the viewer wouldn't understand Lawrence in the same way they do when he emerges dramatically from the desert and declares in defiance of the Nefud and the Arabs' folk wisdom that nothing is written. This character-shaping environment needn't be a landscape either. It might be the collection of people that surrounds the character. A reader would get an entirely different impression of your character if they were to walk through a cattle auction than if they were to walk through a fashion show. They also might think entirely differently about a character at a party in the penthouse of a luxury hotel than a character laid up with a few dirty scoundrels in a seedy motel. Context has a way of telling your readers something about your characters, even if it isn't always easy to articulate. Context characterizes characters. Lastly, other characters and their actions characterize characters as well. Speaking of dirty scoundrels, my favorite example of character on character characterization comes from the first chapter of Robert Louis Stevenson's pirate adventure Treasure Island. Through the first 3/4 of the opening chapter, Jim, the young boy narrating the tale, spends much of the story describing a visitor to his family's inn. This guest is a pirate, and a rude, blustery, bullying drunk of a pirate at that. He spends much of his time bossing people around, upsetting guests with his loud singing, and scaring everyone with frightening stories from his many years at sea. In short, he's not a very nice fellow. Then, toward the end of the chapter, Dr. Livesey comes to care for Jim's father when he becomes deathly ill. Jim offers a very brief description of the doctor. I remember observing the contrast of the neat, bright doctor with his powder as white as snow and his bright black eyes and pleasant manners, made with the coltish country folk, and above all with that filthy, heavy, bleared scarecrow of a pirate of ours. And damned if this isn't doubly clever, because Stevenson is training the reader to do just this, contrast these two men, first in their appearance and then in their manner. Go to work again, Robert. In the meantime, the captain gradually brightened up at his own music, and at last flapped his hand on the table before him in a way we all knew to mean silence. The voices stopped at once, all but Dr. Livesey's. He went on as before, speaking clear and kind and drawing briskly at his pipe between every word or two. The captain glared at him for a while, flapped his hand again, glared still harder, and at last broke out with a villainous low oath. "Silence there between decks!" "Were you addressing me, sir?" says the doctor, and when the ruffian had told him, with another oath, that this was so, "I have only one thing to say to you, sir," replies the doctor, "that if you keep on drinking rum, the world will be soon quit of a very dirty scoundrel." The old fellow's fury was awful. He sprang to his feet, drew and opened a sailor's clasp knife, and balancing it open on the palm of his hand, threatened to pin the doctor to the wall. The doctor never so much as moved. He spoke to him as before, over his shoulder, and in the same tone of voice, rather high, so that all the room might hear, but perfectly calm and steady. "If you do not put that knife this instant in your pocket, I promise, upon my honor, you shall hang at the next assizes." Then followed a battle of looks between them, but the captain soon knuckled under, put up his weapon, and resumed his seat, grumbling like a beaten dog. There are some positive adjectives that color the way the reader might think of the doctor, but it's his actions that really shape who he is in the reader's mind. He's courageous, calm, self-assured, and cool under pressure. The reader learns all this from the way the doctor manages this encounter with this very dirty scoundrel. This is a character being characterized through his interaction with another character. In this case, Stevenson laid the groundwork for this characterization by spending much of the chapter meticulously crafting the reader's impression of the pirate. But the doctor? We know everything we need to know about him after he stares down the captain and doesn't blink. Characters characterize characters. So there you have it. That's the spectrum of knowledge a narrator can present concerning their characters. Knowledge can be explicit, either concrete or abstract description, and knowledge can be implicit, characterization through the character's behavior, the character's interactions with their environment, and the character's interactions with others. All these aspects of characterization shape the reader's impression of them. Great characters come in all shapes and sizes, with personalities representing a spectrum as diverse as humanity itself. Crafting great characters demands attention to these details. But above all, characters must be set in motion. Most of what readers come to appreciate about characters is learned through how they act.